Thank you, Sean. Conor, please, can you your question?
Yes, I have a question for Sean. I just have completed a study into lean production and its application to farm business. You were involved with the Kerry report looking at lean. One of my findings from looking at it was that we need to understand how the quality of our farm produce behaves as a value to the processor. If you look at lean, as you improve the quality, you improve the consistency of productivity, you reduce cost. So if we are to value our product through more dedication in the supply chain, I have costed it this way. If I'm staying out of the open market, that's worth £10. Let's take a wheat price of £150. It's worth £10 to the buyer for me to stay out of the open market. It's worth £10 to the buyer because their plant and their milling plant operates more effectively and efficiently. It's worth £10 for the buyer in terms of reduced defects through the process. It's worth £10 to the buyer in terms of having a higher quantity of sales goods at the other end. My concern with the collaboration that is being proposed through Monitor Farms is that we're being told to expose our enterprise profitability, but we are not being told about the indirect values being generated for the buyer through longer-term dedication. From my point of view, if a wheat price is £150 a tonne, the values generated for the buyer could equal easily £50 a tonne. Therefore, for the risk that we incur to deliver the value to them, we should really be being paid £200 a tonne. So, without full and open and transparent sharing of information, I feel it is an impediment to the farmer to uptake the more dedication. And I wanted to know your views on how you would reconcile these difficulties, and also your view, therefore, on the grocery code adjudicator. Thank you.
Thank you, Conor. Dedicated supply chains, cost plus. Sean, big challenge.
A few issues in there. And there were a lot of £10 by the sounds of it. Just a few things, try and pick a few of the things up that you said. I mean, lean production, we weren't directly involved in lean production. I think it's very important in parts of industry. It's been very important in manufacturing and food manufacturing. I actually think the core of what a lot of the answer to what you're asking, actually, rather than being around lean, is around softer things. It's around relationships. And that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the case studies I used at the end. Because I think undoubtedly there is value to be had. You're right there. Getting the right quality of produce into a manufacturing situation can make a big difference. And perhaps historically, when the value of that product was declining year in, year out, it wasn't something that it wasn't at the top of the pile. If you were a food manufacturer, you were better off investing in something closer to the market. Broadly, I think that perhaps those things are rising up the pile and are going to be looked at more closely. But it is about relationships at the end of the day. And it is a hard old world out there, it's commercial, whether it's at the farming end or at the food end. And so I think there are a number of things that have to come into that. I think structure quite often is important. It's not something we've got into at all today, but I do think that farmers being able to interface well with businesses which are a lot larger than them, quite often working with other farmers is a benefit there. They can offer more, they can actually invest more into some of the things that need to be done. So I think that's one part of the answer. But a lot of it is also simply building up the relationships between food companies and farmers. And I do honestly think that people are much more open to that now. Not everybody, but increasingly people are more open to that now. And that's where I think the big opportunity lies for farming. Because an awful lot of the things you sort of talked about can't be delivered by food companies on their own. And I think increasingly it is coming up their agenda. They want to be able to do that. And that's the big opportunity, I think, for farming. Because it just means that there is something that you can go to a food company and offer. It's not simple, and it's not as simple as I do this and I'll have £10, thank you. But at least there's something that can be done which is seen as valuable. And I think that's a really, really good opportunity for the future.
Thank you, Sean. Robert, do you want to comment?
Yes, I've very much gone down the way of dealing direct as much as possible. And of course, we have the advantage down here that we've got chimney pots. I'm in a situation that 80% of all the crops and livestock I produce is processed within 40 miles of my farm. I've got 3 soft wheat mills within 20 miles of my farm. So for me, why take the risk and grow anything else? But it's very much about personal contact with the buyers and building these personal relationships, and sort of farming the moderate land I have in Nottinghamshire and Cambridgeshire with very low rainfall means I've got to try and get out and earn some premiums in my crops. And looking at things today, 80% of all the cereals I grow are grown with contracts signed before the crops go in the ground and with fixed premiums. And all the other crops like sugar beet, turnip seed crops, rape mustard have a fixed sterling price at the time of contracting. So I took the decision, I worked in the supply trade at one time, to go and deal direct as much as possible.
Thank you, Robert. Are there any roving mics that we can use, or does someone have roving mics on the floor? No? Well, does someone want to ask a question? Yes, can you go to a mic then, please? It's very difficult to see.
John Tingey from Gloucestershire. I'd like to ask Mark a question. I'm very pleased that you're confident that the euro crisis is past, or we're through it. My question is, what if the Greeks don't like the austerity and won't do it? Given that Europe doesn't seem to be able to enforce regulations on laying hens, will it be able to enforce regulation, austerity on the Greek population, and what if they refuse?
Thank you, John.
No, the Greeks don't like it, and we are probably close to the limit of what they will take, and they may not take it. But the fact remains, we still have time to work it out. We still have time to work out what to do without the markets putting us in under daily pressure, with European leaders having to schedule emergency summits next week just to try and work out what to do. We now have time. And what the Germans have said they want is a fiscal stability union. That is a fairly disciplined affair. It's not a fiscal transfer union. And ultimately, if Greece doesn't want to play, you have two choices. You can either kick them out, or you can work out a way to get them out in an orderly fashion. Now, some people think this is possible. I happen to think it's extremely difficult and very risky. You only have to go back a few years. The Americans thought that they could allow Lehman's to fail. Within a day of having done so, they regretted that. Greece, an enforced exit by Greece could be a similar situation. So what you may end up with, actually, is not a fiscal transfer union, not a fiscal stability union, but a fiscal transfer union, where you shovel money from north to south, and you accept that that is what you will do because it is cheaper than the alternative. You shovel money from north to south, and you keep shoveling. Doesn't sound very appetizing, but then this is a fiscal transfer union, and what do we do in this country? We shovel money from south to north.
Yes, Robert, yours.
That's exactly what we are, and that in the end is what Europe may become. We already do it. I mean, regional aid. Yeah, we already do regional aid. One can argue that a lot of the agricultural support is fiscal transfers. So in the end, Europe may end up doing exactly the same for Greece and the other parts of southern Europe, unless you can be absolutely sure that you can get a country out in an orderly fashion. And I'm not at all yet convinced that that's the case. Whatever happens, though, we do have time to think about it.
Thank you for that, Mark. Charles, you've got a question?
Yes, question for Robert, but also the rest of the panel. Robert, I saw you last Monday on Inside Out doing an excellent piece on the environmental measures you do on your farm. And of course, this morning, Caroline Spellman spoke about the biodiversity you can see as you come through the Channel Tunnel back into England. Do you think we as an industry ought to be doing more with things like Open Farm Sunday and CFE to promote to the British public what we're doing on farms environmentally.
Thank you for that, Charles. Robert.
I think the one thing I said on that programme that I always think conservation and joint environment schemes, whether it must be done on a voluntary basis, you get much better results and it's much better targeted if you do it like that. I've been doing it a long time. I've worked it in with my farm and I've got myself in a position that 70% of the cereal crops I sow and grow I get an environmental premium on them. But I think, to use a very, very blunt weapon of putting 7% or whatever it's going to be on everyone throughout the country on a compulsory basis is wrong. If you go north of Cambridge out into the swamps, and it's grade 1, marvellous land there. They could grow super root crops, vegetables, and everything like that. Those people want to be getting on and getting on producing, doing what they're best at. I've got a lot of marginal land. I can work these schemes in and have grass and make it work for me. But I think when set aside was mooted the other year, we went down the CFE route, and I hope that works.
Thank you, Robert. It's about targeted approach, I would suggest. And someone like yourself with enthusiasm and the passion to deliver. There's a speaker up at that microphone. Is it Jake?
Jake Pickering here. I would argue that with the public perception of farming, we need to produce more food from a finite resource. I would say the real business challenge is getting the public on side. How do we get the public on side to see that the Common Agricultural Policy and all the payments that come out of that is actually a payment to the housewife? And how do we get them to see that if they want to continue paying the prices they are for food, they're going to have to accept changes to the modern agriculture, such as projects like Nocturne Dairy? How are we going to get the public on side once again in British farming?
Thank you for that, Jake. Robert, do you want to go first? And then
well, I'd actually say we have got them on side. If you look at the surveys which have been done, I read the other day that 75% of people thought, farmers are doing an excellent job. If we'd done a survey 10 years ago, just when we were pulling out of foot and mouth, the foot and mouth period, I think the general public viewed us as a subsidy junkie sort of thing, really, and they had a very poor opinion on us. I think there's a lot of excellent work being done, a lot of excellent publicity being done on showing people, what we can do. Yes, we've got to produce. We keep hearing about what the population's going to rise to, but I think we all realise that we can't go back to the days of the sort of 70s and 80s. When I had 3 years at Harper Adams, and I think, to be honest with you, I never heard the words environment or conservation mentioned in the whole of my 3 years there. It won't be production at any cost. The environmental, agenda is here to stay, but it's got to be managed.
Thank you. Sean, do you want to comment?
Just pick one thing up. I would agree. I mean, the general attitude and the surveys show it. Compared to 10 or 15 years ago, agriculture, I think, is seen very much more positively. You talked about the subsidy being the business challenge. I actually think the other thing you mentioned is a real business challenge. You talked about nocturne dairies. And I think there, not particularly that particular case, but the acceptance of science and technology as a crucial part of the answer, I think, is perhaps the next big challenge. I talked around productivity. Productivity gains will come from science and technology. And I think there are big issues there, particularly when, that's a scale issue, isn't it? But I think that's a sort of discussion that does need to be had with the consumer as we go forward and with the public. Because if we're going to have a successful industry and compete in an open market, which we will increasingly have to, with other people who are upping their scale and using new science and new technology, we must have access to the same.
Thank you, Sean. The clock is ticking. 2 quick questions. Young lady at the microphone and Stuart Agnew up here. Young lady first.
Thank you for calling me young lady. Catherine from the Northwest. I would just like to, there's quite a lot of young people here today, and at home we've actually had our son come back to the farming partnership, and I'd just like to ask, what you're saying that there's quite a good prospect for farming, and I was just like to ask the panel, what advice would you give to young people that are coming freshly into agriculture? What knowledge would you think it would impart to them, and what would you advise them to do? Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll have Stuart.
European Parliament. I'm challenging you to a bet, Mark Beresford. I'll bet you £100 that Greece will not be in the euro by the end of 2012. Are you going to take me on? I think with the backing of the Hong Kong and Shanghai Bank behind you, you could probably afford £100. But I will give my £100 to Robert Law as a deposit now. Are you prepared to do the same?
Thank you, Stuart. We're not lad books, but Mark, do you want to pick that one up first?
If I was to take bets on behalf of the bank, I would be in very serious trouble. Banks have taken enough bets without me putting them into any more. Thank you very much. But they will still be in the euro.
Thank you. The question on what advice to young people coming in the industry. I'll start with you, Robert, and we'll quickly go along with the sort of panel.
Well, I'd say first thing, you've got to be positive at all times about what you're doing. Go out and get some training, get as much experience as you can. Think out of the box. Think of doing something different. That's how I sort of managed to expand and push things on. And I know actually getting to farm in your own right now is extremely hard, but there's a lot of very good jobs out there. I mean, I know from my own experience, and I mentioned in my talk, trying to get people to come and lamb my sheep, shepherd sheep, it's extremely hard. And I've got two shepherds at home, and they're both they're both higher rate taxpayers. And they have their houses on the farm. And to me, I think it's a fairly good career now. And I know sort of 20 years ago, if I advertised for someone on the farm, tractor driver or whatever, I might get 100 people ring up. I think the last time I advertised, I had 2 people ring up. It's very hard to find, good, young, motivated people. I mean, I was very lucky that somebody spotted me and was sort of prepared to help me at the time. But just be positive about it. We don't hear any of this negative stuff.
Thank you, Sean.
Well, just briefly, I mean, I think I would concur with a lot of Robert said. I mean, I think it's a good time to go for it. It's a good time to come into the industry. It's a good time to come into the food and the farming industry. My advice would be the same, really, about bringing something from the outside in. I think the future of the industry is going to be around bringing science, technology, and good business management in, sorts of things that can be picked up in lots of different places. And I think bringing some of those into the industry, if you're going to come into it, is a good thing to bring.
Thank you. And Mark?
I'd offer one final thought. Hopefully, if you come into the industry, you'll enjoy farming, enjoy working outdoors and all the rest of it. But don't ever forget that at the end of it, there's a consumer. And I think in the past, farmers tended to forget that at the end of the process was somebody going into a shop buying your produce. Never forget the consumer.
Thank you, Mark. On behalf of conference, can I thank the 3 of you. The clock has caught up with us, but on that sort of very positive note, it's a good place to conclude. I think we've had an extremely useful business challenge session, and it highlights to me the need for a positive, modern, profitable industry. As Mark has said, we must not forget our consumer. On those positive notes, can I thank the 3 of you, particularly Mark, for coming in at short notice. But to Mark, Sean and Robert, thank you very much, and